Hi everyone, my name is Matt, and let's grab our pumpkin spice lattes and paint this Kurnoth Hunter fast using contrast paints. After cleaning and assembling the model, I primed it using my favorite method, beginning with a coat of gray primer, followed by a couple airbrush layers of white paint from the top and sides. I like to think of it as a sort of subtle zenithal style prime, with more of the white paint on the top of the model and transitioning to gray on the underside. Next I painted a layer of skeleton horde over most of the model, avoiding the sword and branches. When painting this layer, work on one section at a time and try to keep the paint even. Some pooling is good because that's what creates shading, but we don't want to put so much paint on the model that it drips or takes forever to dry. I'm also painting the skeleton horde on the armor panels. Those will end up being a much darker brown later, but the skeleton horde layer will make the end result smoother. Next I made a mix of equal parts skeleton horde and Iyanden yellow, and I painted this on all the branches. The yellow on its own looked too vibrant, but mixing in skeleton horde helped make the yellow more muted. The most important part here is to make sure the paint gets in all the cracks, so turn the model and paint from different angles. Try to be as neat as possible, but if you make any mistakes they'll be easy to correct later. After the yellow was dry, I put some orange shade on my palette and added a very small amount of Magmadroth Flame contrast paint. The shade paint is way too transparent on its own, so it needed something to make it stronger. I want to have a blended effect on the branches, going from yellow at the top and getting darker at the bottom, so I painted the orange on the bottom half of the branches, working one section at a time. After painting one section, I rinsed out the brush, dried it on a paper towel, and then used the damp brush to soften and blend the edge. I wanted to shade the branches a little bit more, so I painted Fyreslayer flesh on the bottom third of each branch. Now it's time to paint the dark brown armor sections using Wyldwood, thinned slightly with contrast medium, about a 3-to-1 mix. It can be tough to get an even finish with some contrast paints, especially the darker colors. Since contrast paint is transparent, it means the underlayers show through, and when you apply a dark, transparent color over a very light base coat, you get a lot more variety of tones showing through. There are some different ways to achieve a smoother finish. The initial layer of skeleton horde darkened the armor slightly, and that will help even out the layers that go on top of it. Another way of achieving an even finish is to thin the paint and apply several layers. By utilizing both of these techniques, we should get a much smoother result. When that first layer of Wyldwood was dry, I painted a second layer of Wyldwood. Just like the first, I tried to keep it smooth and even. Next I painted the sword with Bonewhite. I wanted a very even finish, so I painted several thin layers, allowing the paint to dry between each coat. I'm going to shade the sword in 2 stages. The first stage is a thin, subtle glaze made from 4 parts contrast medium to 1 part Mantis Warrior's green. I'm applying the paint in an even layer, and the goal is to tint everything slightly, but not allow too much of the paint to pool in any one area. Now it's time to build up the green color in select areas using full strength Mantis Warrior's green. Pick one side of the blade and paint some green about a quarter of the way down. Then rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and use the damp brush to blend out the edge. Then I went to the other side of the blade and blended the paint in the same way, but in the opposite direction. I also painted some green directly into some of the cracks. The box art has a cool glowing effect in the eyes and the armor panels, and there's a really easy way to achieve this in just 2 layers. Begin with some white paint, thin slightly with water, and paint it directly in the cracks. When the white paint is completely dry, paint some Mantis Warrior's green all over the white. I like to vary the thickness of the green paint and allow it to pool in some areas more than others. At this stage you could finish off the base and call the model done. But I think there are a couple really quick and easy ways to bring the model up to the next level. So let's get started. I started off with Vallejo Offwhite, thinned slightly with water, and painted a few highlights on the edges of the light wood color. Then I painted a few highlights on the edges of the sword. Next I used Steel Legion Drab in 2 stages, beginning with a thin glaze on some of the dark armor. Look for any areas where the brown is uneven or too dark, and push the paint towards the edges. The brush will leave more paint where it last touches the model, so if you end the brush stroke on the edge of the armor, you can get a blended gradation kind of effect. After painting some glazes on the armor, I used Steel Legion Drab with less water in the mix, so the paint is thicker and stronger, and I picked out some of the edges. Paint as many or as few as you want, depending on what kind of look you're going for and how much time you want to spend. And last I painted a couple quick dots of Dorn yellow in the eyes. I used an old brush to apply a thick layer of textured paint. And while that's still wet, I sprinkled some coarse gravel and fine sand for texture. When that dried, I painted the whole base with a thin layer of Rhinox hide. I dry brushed the base with Mournfang brown, followed by Balor brown, and then a light dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, and then shaded them with Agrax Earthshade. I painted the rim of the base with black, and when that was dry, I applied some patches of static grass with superglue. I wanted to make the base fall themed to match the model, and this bag of model railroad foliage matches the model pretty well. I picked it apart into small pieces and attached them to the base with tweezers and superglue. And here's the finished Kurnoth Hunter in his colorful fall glory, ready to drink some pumpkin spice lattes and go to battle. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please click the like button. And if you want more, check out some of my other painting tutorials. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Well, that's it for now. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy painting.